Welcome to Season 2, Episode 11 of the Be Conscious podcast. This episode marks the second in my series of awakenings, where I will be interviewing remarkable individuals who have made their transition into the most authentic selves and works. Today, I have the pleasure of interviewing Ryan Burton.
Welcome to the Be Conscious podcast, the show that brings you enlightened perspectives on the frequency of money, life's many challenges, and those heavy feelings that may be holding you back from living your best life. And now your host, Dr. Susan Nicholas.
Ryan is a meditation practitioner with over a decade of experience in a variety of Buddhist and non-dual traditions. In his early 20s, he traveled throughout Southeast Asia and China seeking spiritual knowledge. Today, he delivers lectures on meditations and spirituality in the US, Nepal, and Thailand. Ryan, welcome to the Be Conscious podcast. Is there anything that I missed?
That pretty much sums it up, Susan. Thank you for having me. It's wonderful to be here.
Oh, Ryan, it's so wonderful to have you. I heard this depth of maturity in your speaking on the Clubhouse platform, and I just couldn't help to want to learn a little bit more about you and how you came to this place of beingness where you are today. And I was learning a little bit more about you and learned that you said you'd been ordained as a Buddhist monk. And I don't know exactly how old you are, but you look quite young to me.
Right.
And I thought to myself, I got to figure out, where does Ryan come from and how did you find yourself on this path of, if I may call it, of enlightenment? Can you share with us how this all started?
Sure. It's been an interesting journey. I'm half Thai. So my mother is from Thailand and my dad is from Iowa. And so as a little boy, as a kid, my mom wanted me to learn Thai. So she'd send me to this temple that had a summer camp in North Hollywood in Southern California. So I remember being in the temple as a little kid in the morning. We would do some chanting and we would all sit for meditation, but it wasn't taught to us or anything. The monks would just say, the monks and the teachers would just tell us to be quiet and keep our mouth shut and not move. So we did that every day, and it didn't have much of an effect on my life at all, but surely it was a seed and I had some familiarity with it. So when I grew up and got into high school, middle school, and high school, I started to become more philosophically oriented and was just interested in philosophy and metaphysics. I consider myself an atheist, more or less, or agnostic, but I was open to some of these ideas, and I wanted to know and learn more. This journey really started for me from a place of suffering. Actually, I was 10 or 11 years old, and I was going through my dad's things, and I opened a drawer. And I saw all of these blackened glass pipes, just countless pipes. And underneath the meth pipes was a picture of me in first grade. And I think that was the first moment in my life where I really knew just very, very deep suffering. I didn't know what the pipes were. Right, I was just a boy, but I could sense that it was dark, and I could sense that something was wrong with my dad. And so that was the beginning of a lot of anger and frustration for me as a youth. So then by the time I'm like 15 or 16, I've already gotten in a lot of trouble with the law. My dad was a very functional drug addict. Actually, he's a fantastically loving person. He never laid a hand on me. My mom's Asian, so she's the one who disciplined me, right? But my dad was always just a really loving guy. So growing up in that environment, even though I had two loving parents, two great parents, I could see all these problems that were coming from the addiction, and I could see that I couldn't do anything about it, and I couldn't change my father or any of that. So this anger started to really grow in me. And yeah, by the time I was 16, 17, I'd already been arrested multiple times, potentially looking at going to juvenile hall for violating probation. So I was in all kinds of trouble. And my mom just begged me to go on this meditation retreat with her. She saw a commercial on a Thai Buddhist TV channel for a retreat in Southern California, surprisingly. And so we go, and these monks were teaching the retreat at this Catholic monastery that they rented out. And I sat down the first day, sat down the second day in the meditation hall, just absolute frustration. Nothing happened. Just really, really not able to meditate one bit whatsoever. And but there was a nice environment, and the people were great. And then on the third day, I sat down in the hall. I think it was the final meditation block of the night, actually. And one moment, I was in my chair, just trying to still my mind, and then the next, consciousness was just floating upwards, really, really high upwards. It was just like into the sky, and there was this brilliant light. And that was the first religious or mystical experience I ever had in my life. And everything began to change after that. I don't know exactly how, but suddenly I had a conscience. Suddenly I had a sense of things that I should or shouldn't do. And it made me clean my life up pretty fast. Yeah. After the meditation retreat, I just started to get things in order and stopped messing around and stopped getting in trouble. But that's how it started. After that initial meditation retreat, a year later, I go to a Vipassana retreat as soon as I turned 18. That was a 10-day silent retreat. That was an incredible experience. I'd never done something that deep. You don't talk to anyone. You're not supposed to look at anyone. Just do the meditation for 10 days, and I was hooked after that.
Heard of those?
Yeah, they're incredible. So after that, I was just totally. I was gung ho. I just had the drive for spiritual knowledge, and the drive for spiritual experience was so strong, was so hot at that time. And yeah, I was in community college. And a year after that, I went to do a 90-day meditation retreat in Thailand, and that was pretty much the beginning of where I am now. So,
Ryan, what an interesting journey into your awakening. I wrote several notes when you were talking, and I wanted to go back a little bit to those blackened glass pipes, and with that picture of you in the first grade. What was that? Was that a moment of within yourself recognizing or admitting maybe to yourself that there was a problem? Or prior to seeing that, were you unaware that your father was a drug addict?
Yeah, totally unaware.
And so it seemed that the finding of those pipes took you to a place of like spiraling out. Looking back on that younger version of yourself, what do you think that was about? Why was that so traumatic when you lived with a loving father that you didn't otherwise know had an issue? Did it awaken something, another knowing within you, do you suspect?
Yeah, I think what hurt about it most, it's unusual because I didn't know what it was. I was just 10, but I just knew I could just sense this darkness from it. And then I had the thought that my dad wasn't normal,
Hmm.
and that my life wasn't normal. That this is actually not what I've seen in the shows and in the movies, and what my friends have to deal with. And that turned out to be accurate. A lot of my friends that grew up with a father, their father was much more involved in their life because the father was able to be involved. My dad would have these binges where he would sleep for weeks, and there were times where we were in the same house, didn't talk to him for a year. Oh, hey,
Hmm.
hey, hey, Dad, hey, Ryan. So this feeling and this experience that I had of like this man that I love and who has shown me so much affection. It's like he's right there, and I can't even touch him. I can't connect with him. Yeah, that was hard,
Yeah.
and I think that was where the pain really came from.
Yeah, it sounds like a crumbling of an illusion, of a dismantling of a construct of a belief that everything was okay and normal, and I had a normal family, to realizing that you don't, that it was all false, in a sense. I sometimes I think that happens in many different types of scenarios for people that embark on conscious journeys or awakening journeys. They realize whatever they thought was the right thing to do, or what was their purpose, or what society deemed as right or true was not. And then they're shaken by that, or in their religion or their beliefs, for example. And this seems like it happened right in front of you in your own home, and at a very young, impressionable age. You mentioned that you um, you called yourself atheist or agnostic. Do you what does that mean to you? And being ordained as a Buddhist monk, have your beliefs changed?
Yeah, great question. By atheist and agnostic, I meant I didn't at all believe in a higher power, and I didn't have any reason to believe in extraordinary spiritual things or extraordinary spiritual people or all of that. So, I mean, I'd always been my father was an agnostic, and from a very young age, he told me to just come to my own decisions and my own beliefs on my own through reason and through exploration and through experience. So I was very fortunate to not have any kind of religious or even intellectual conditioning. My dad didn't tell me God doesn't exist. That was definitely not what I was taught. He
Mm-hmm.
he just said, "Yeah,
Go
experience
figure it out
life,
for yourself.
you'll figure it out for yourself." Yeah, and that was so crucial and important to me because I feel that if I had been conditioned in any way, I've always been a very extreme person. So that conditioning could have led to some very very solid belief structures that could have gotten in the way of spiritual unfolding, at least in my life. So how that's changed over the course of the last 10 years and just over my life is that I don't make assumptions through inference or through reason. Really, I know that I don't really know much. There's things that I do know, and I teach from the things that I know, and I live from the things that I've experienced and known directly. But there's so much that I just have no idea of. So, for example, I have the I have the intuition, right? I have the sense that there's an intelligent order to the universe, and that there's a hand behind form and behind everything that exists, right? But I make the distinction between that as a belief that I hold and that as a truth that I know, because I don't actually know that as a fact, right? So this kind of orientation of testing and discovering things that I know by personal experience, and then leaving the door open for things that I don't know really to be true or not, that has been extremely helpful for me, and it's allowed me to stay open-minded. I don't make I don't make these very, very solid truth claims or assumptions. I just say what it is that I've gone through and what it is that I know by experience.
I think that is a mark of kind of spiritual maturity. I think when we're early in our conscious awareness or early in our awakening periods, we can be mistaken to think that, we know everything, because we realize that we are, as beings, as spiritual beings, we are all knowing. Like, we are embodiments of the universe, and thus we can derive the answers from within us. That it doesn't come from the outside necessarily or all the time. But I think as you mature in your practice, you realize that doesn't mean that you don't have blind spots in your awareness, and that there is still continued growth that we never really complete, no matter how quote unquote enlightened that we become while we were still embodied, that there's still a further on journey for all of us. And I always said, as I got older, that if I knew everything that I thought I knew when I was 18 years old, I would rule the world. Because I think as I've gotten older, I realize I don't know much at all. Right. And what I do know comes from my own personal experiences. Even though I've done the education stuff, I realize that even in that learning of college and medical school and business school, there's unknowns. There are many things that we don't know. That we're still learning in all of our practices, all of our understanding of even the physical world, and that's ever changing. And so I really appreciate that, and I love hearing it from people that chronologically in this life are still quite young, coming into that awareness, because I think most arrogance comes from ignorance, not knowing what you don't know.
Absolutely.
I wanted to come back to something that you said about that first 3-day retreat you did, when you said on the third day, consciousness was floating upward, and it was the first time you had experienced this mystical or magical experience. Can you describe for us what that was, and what did you experience?
Yeah, there was just this, it wasn't a out of body experience, because I've had those, and those have clear defining characteristics and qualities. There's actual separation of a spiritual body or a subtle body from the physical one. So it wasn't that. This was just for somehow consciousness was just transported upwards, and it was like suddenly my physical body was this very, very small appendage of this like large consciousness. So there was still some data coming in from the physical body. It was just very, very, very minute. But the totality of the awareness that's where most of the attention and experience was at. So there was just this massive, warm, loving light, and I had never encountered this intelligence that didn't have a human form before. Right? It was just a light was speaking to me, and I won't say what the light said, but I will say that it was just so loving. That's the main word I could describe it. It felt like it embraced me and held me, and suddenly it became clear from that light and from what it had said, the few words that it had said, that spirituality was really the direction that my life was going to take. And I considered that a religious or mystical experience just from the happiness, the massive, immense happiness and joy and acceptance that was felt in that experience with this light. And I have no idea what that light was. Still, even to this day. I was going
to ask you if it was, if you recognized it now as your higher self, as you.
Probably probably was the higher self, because I had experiences with that later, out of body, and it did have a similar taste, as we could call it, spiritually. But of course, if I had a different background, for example, a person would call that God or call that Allah,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So,
And maybe it's all one. Maybe it's all the same.
right. I think what happens is the experience and the truth of an experience. I would call it like the raw data, the actual experience itself. Um, the experience is the experience, but our interpretation after the fact is
Mm-hmm.
is interpretation, right? So
Mm-hmm.
I've had many experiences where the raw data was actually accurate, but the interpretation was completely wrong, and the experience
Mm-hmm.
was actually about another person instead of being about me. And you being a spiritual person as well, and even if there are people who are psychic that listen to this podcast, they know exactly what I'm talking about. That initial spark of information is different than what we infer and deduct from it.
Mm-hmm. I understand you. I understand you. So you you brought up something in me that I wanted to share about kind of having awareness of the higher self. I think the first time that I had awareness, first I'd never had language. I'd never heard of such a thing. But my first experience was, I would say, my first out of body experience, when I felt the energy of me, the life energy of me, separate from my body, and I realized in an instant that I was existing as pure energy, and I I became fearful. But before fear took over, I was actually enjoying this experience of what I felt was flying above a city, a night city full of lights, like, skyscrapers and full of lights, that I was just soaring above it. And I remember thinking, oh my God, this is what people talk about, flying in their dream. And I didn't have any other memory of having such an experience. But what made this different was, as I'm soaring, what I feel like above the city full of lights, I notice that I don't have arms or legs or wings or a cape or anything like that, that I'm existing as pure energy, like a pure consciousness. And that's when the fear started to come. And I heard a voice say, don't look down. And of course, as soon as I heard that, I looked down, or what would be my eyes, but I didn't have eyes. And that city had crumbled to ash. And I realized that was an illusion created to pacify my mind, that I was flying, like it was on an earthly context to help me with this first flight, this first journey out of body. And I began to understand innately that all of this existence is an illusion of sorts, and that we have a higher existence, and that is of pure conscious energy. And when I began to feel fear, that's when I felt myself be returned to my body. And when I came back into my body and had awareness of my physical surroundings, I remembered saying, the next time I fly, I will not be afraid, because the experience was so freeing. Like I never felt lighter or better or more at peace. And as I became to understand more about this energetic travel, this multidimensional travel that I've described, that it's really about this ability that we have, that I believe is latent within us, within our DNA, that I believe is activated or awakened within us, that we can experience the dimensions and tap into higher realms of understanding and being. And so I really kind of resonate with this consciousness. And I often wondered who spoke to me when I heard that, do not, like clear as day, clear as a bell, do not look down. And I recognize it to be me, the higher, the more expansive part of me, not the physical Susan in the body lying in her bed in Atlanta, Georgia, but the higher expansive me. And I was wondering if you came to the same conclusion. I didn't think at the time of God or anything, but I thought I was more like you were, where I think at that time in life, I was considering myself agnostic, like, or having no beliefs at all. And I was opening up to what truly is. And so that, I'm just so impressed in a sense where you were experiencing this as a 16-year-old boy. I was experiencing that as a 40-year-old mom who wished no longer to exist. I love that young people, if you will, or young bodies are waking up consciously.
Yeah, absolutely. I feel that, to speak of the higher self particularly, because we're on this topic, I did have an out-of-body experience later at about 19 that was related to, I could only describe it as a higher self. It was definitely a vastly powerful and intelligent consciousness that was formless, right? So I was 19. I had just finished this 90-day meditation retreat and mindfulness coach certification program in Thailand. And I was the youngest guy on the retreat. It was super, super hard. I was really having a hard time. The first 2 weeks kind of had these blowout bliss experiences, and then I just spent the next 2.5 months trying to get back there. And wow, is that a waste of time? Anyone who's listening is going to do a long meditation retreat or even spiritual work in general, don't be so attached to, the bliss states and the profound experiences, because it actually just chokes up the natural flow of the meditation. Mm-hmm. So I spent all this time, just beating myself up, and I was sitting next to this guy on the retreat who was from India, and he was a couple years older than me. His father is a monk, so he's been meditating since he was 12. And this guy could sit every single day. He sat for 6 or 8 hours without moving a muscle. And I'm over here crying after sitting for 45 minutes because the pain is too much in my legs. And, so I become best friends with the meditation virtuoso of the retreat, right?
Yeah.
And all the jealousy, Susan, the jealousy was just tearing me apart, you know? So, because that was the thing, like, this is the thing about some of these initial mystical experiences and religious experiences. If the identification doesn't shift from ego and from the person in space-time to the broader reality and to the pure consciousness, all of these experiences get internalized and they become a part of a story. And if you see someone that, is in a place where you want to be, that still makes you feel bad, even though
makes you less than. Yeah,
it makes you less than spiritually, which is a crazy concept. There's no such thing, right? So anyways, this guy is just blowing my mind with how he's able to meditate. And after the retreat, I was so distraught. One of the goals in Buddhist meditation is to enter these deep states of absorption, at least when you're doing specific kinds of practices like mindfulness of breathing or you're visualizing an object. Eventually, your awareness and the stillness becomes so refined that your awareness becomes absorbed into the object itself. And there's a loss of bodily perception. In Buddhism, those are called the jhanas. And the Buddha taught them throughout his life as ways to purify the mind and prime the mind to really have enough power to see deeply into reality as it is, even at the subatomic level, being able to see things purely at the level of truth and existence. So I was all gung-ho and ready. It's like, okay, I'm going to attain samadhi at the end of this retreat, and I'll just be straight on my way to enlightenment, right? And that is the complete opposite of what happened. I was actually in a worse place after the retreat. I was just so distraught. And I remember I was staying with a family friend in the north of Thailand after having left the monastery, and I don't know why, but that suffering, I felt like I had just failed the meditation retreat, and the suffering was just so strong in my heart, and I really just cried out to that light, that higher self that had been there from the start, and I cried out to my teacher, and I just didn't know what to do. I was this existential failure and suffering and whatnot, and I sat down for a meditation, and it absolutely just mind was all over the place, and I laid down after that. I laid down and I just started to drift off, and then the out of body vibrational state started. So you start to feel this, your whole body starts vibrating, and there's this very, very loud sound, and all kinds of interesting things can happen, like lights or sounds or whatever. And so there's a separation from the physical body. And as soon as I got out, I just yelled it in the astral body, take me to my higher self. Take me. And boy, did it take me. It took me. So it just it was just this blast through hyperspace. And it was like, and this was markedly different than the first one I described, because this was I was actually experiencing this the same way that it's as real as this conversation you and I.
I know.
Right? Yeah,
I know.
You get exactly what I'm talking about. You had OBEs. So there's this massive wall of light, like this multi-dimensional, multicolor. I mean, there could even be colors that don't exist. It was just this rainbow matrix of light.
Yeah, of colors we don't have names for yet, just in their brilliance and their variety. Yes, I understand you.
Exactly. And even in the astral body before this light, I was still suffering. Even in the spiritual energy consciousness, the pain was still there. And this light, this intelligence could sense it. And it just, it just said 2 words, or it said like 3 words, 4 words. Everything will be okay. But when it said that, it was like thunder through the clouds, like a cosmic voice had said it. It said, everything will be okay. And it was a bliss equivalent to like 10,000 orgasms at the same time or something. It's just really indescribable. It began arising in like fractal patterns in every cell and particle in my body. And it was just unbelievable. But there was still a clear sense of duality. You know, there was me, there was this consciousness, and there was this light that was just causing this massive explosion of bliss and energy to happen. And then, you know, consciousness began to rematerialize in the physical body, and I was just left with, what in the world was that? I've never, ever experienced something like that. I wasn't on a psychedelic, wasn't even in a meditation. It was just this supernatural, incredible intelligence that was able to do this. So that definitely changed the way that I saw things. And certainly, if I was anything but a Buddhist, I for sure would have called that God. 100%. It was just so profound. So, but I said, take me to the higher self, and that's what happened. So,
well, Ryan, when we come back from this little break, we're going to talk about what that something was. And we're going to talk a little bit more about how you became an ordained Buddhist monk and a near-death experience that I think you mentioned.
Absolutely.
All right, stay tuned.
Like what you're hearing so far, make sure you never miss a show by clicking the subscribe button now. How would you describe your relationship with money? Did you ever imagine that your deepest feelings and beliefs about money could be preventing you from acquiring all the wealth that you desire? Click the link below in the show notes to learn more about Dr. Nicholas's highly sought-after Frequency of Money program to positively transform your relationship with money. This podcast is made possible by listeners like you. Thank you for your support. Now, Back to the show.
Ryan, you spoke about this cracking sound as you left your body, this loud sound like a crack of thunder. And I've experienced that too. And when I first had that, I was trying to figure out why. Like I thought it was just almost like breaking a sound barrier or like an energetic shift on this like universal like scale. Um, and I had asked around about it, and I said, I feel like I can hear this crack, this shift, and then I can leave, I can go out. And someone said to me that they perceive time, the construct of time that we are in on the third dimension, as the fourth dimension. And we have to break through the time construct to leave out of Earth. And I thought how profound that thought was. But I also recognize that when we are in a third dimensional space, when we are embodied here, the soul of us, in a sense, to leave the body leaves not like in a physical sense, but it leaves in a multidimensional sense. Like it transcends a dimension to exist in this higher state of consciousness. It's not a physical place. It's an energetic frequency. And I believe when we are resonating or vibing in a human form, we're at a certain requisite frequency to be here. And when we leave out of it, we exist at a different frequency. Some say a higher frequency. I think we can also exist in a lower frequency, if you will, out of physical form into denser forms of construct, denser constructs of form and thought, of beingness, and almost in a denser form of gravity when we're out kind of in the astrals. That has been my experience. But I think when we go into higher realms of existence, we have to break through dimensional energetic places. And that is what we can sometimes hear in our physical ear and what we feel like. You may have experienced it as well, like leaving out of the body, you feel some resistance. Like it's a huge activation, like a rising of energy to get out, like an activation energy. To be able to do that, we don't do it at the same frequency from which we came from. And so I think in that space, when you go into other alternate dimensions, you're experiencing really possibilities that aren't in our immediate awareness here on Earth. I think it would be a little bit too much for us in our daily lives to be floating in both spheres and needing to be embodied and do what it is to be our work on their planet keeps us in a different vibrational state than when we were out of physical body, existing in other realms of I call them different realms of understanding of existence, different frequencies surrounding our planet. What is your take on that?
I would definitely agree with you on that point. One of the things that is known is when you start to have, it can happen for a person, but when they start to have out-of-body experiences or some of these very mystical types of experiences, that there's an actual destabilization that can happen. It's like suddenly the rug is really pulled out from under you, and what you thought you were is suddenly not so clear. I mean, before you previously just thought that you were a physical body, basically in this meat suit, and you have to operate in this time-space form dimension, and that's all that there is. And then suddenly you have this experience of completely transcending that at a multi-dimensional level. And as the experiences become repeated and you begin to encounter different levels of this multi-dimensional existence, and even the different kinds of beings and intelligences that exist in this reality, it's a lot. I mean, the average person who is a doctor or a lawyer or running a business is just not, talking to angels out of body or meeting non-human intelligences. That's just, for the average person, that's not happening. So I think that as incredible as some of these experiences are, the training that I had as a Buddhist monk in that kind of environment, it allowed me to really integrate some of the experiences and insights that I was having. Because this is the thing, you could have all these incredible out-of-body experiences and these incredible states, but if your life is a mess, if you're getting hit with the same lesson from the universe again and again, and you're just not getting it, it's like, what was the value of the experience? I mean, sure, it was incredible, but that's it. It was incredible. If you're not actually using that wisdom and living that wisdom, we find ourselves just still stuck in limitation and stuck in the problems that exist in our lives, in our world. So there is a process. There has to be a conscious intention to actually take the wisdom from these spiritual experiences and the insights from the things that you're going through, and actually begin to apply that to our lives. And you would think that everyone does this, but it's not the case. I know a lot of extremely powerful spiritual people, and their life and their situation with their families is in shambles. It's like, you could have a very profound blowout experience, but it takes ordinary wisdom to get through life, and it takes ordinary wisdom to relate to people. And everything that we do as far as work and the contribution that we make to the world is built on relationships. And a lot of these experiences, you'd be surprised how isolated you could become. So I just wanted to say that.
Well, I couldn't agree with you more. I think one of the things that I came to understand after waking up, that's about 9 years ago, it was in 2012, was that when you have a crisis awakening, in many ways like I did, I came from a place of not wanting to exist any longer and really longing for a place of home and like literally to get off the planet. That, I believe that experience is just the beginning. And I think some people perceive that awakened experience as like an ending, like a culmination of, oh, now I'm awake. But when you have that experience, like when it comes from a place of suffering, kind of like when you believed that you failed at the retreat, and then you have this out of body experience, and the pain you said was still there. I think what that awakening does is it helps us to go back and heal it. Like it gives us in some ways higher awareness and maybe some tools to learn how to transform those energies, how to actually heal them. And I think some people can have that experience and don't do any of the inner work, I call it. Like they actually don't go back and heal the wounds of themselves, of their lineage, of their families. And they cycle scenarios and cycles over and over again. You said you repeat these cycles over and over again because the universe is showing you giving you one more opportunity to recognize this and transform it. And you don't do it. You cycle into the same patterns, and then they become exhausted, like really defeated. And it's because there's sometimes this, I believe, false belief that once I have an awakening experience, then I must have reached something, some level where I'm done and it's all just going to be gravy. And I think in many ways, when we wake up consciously, that our lives are even more challenged because we are, I think to those who are given much is expected. And so if I'm given the gift of consciousness, then much is expected of me to overcome what has been holding me back and then go on to help humanity overcome what's holding back humanity. And so I totally agree with you on these concepts that we need that this conscious journey, whatever way that it unfolds for each of us, propels us on even a greater journey of depth, of introspection, of frequencies to evolve into than when we were asleep. Before we had that, when we were in our regular same old suffering cycles. We're in different higher cycles of discovery and self-awareness and conscious awareness.
Right. Great way of putting that, by the way. That was beautiful.
Oh, thank you. I appreciate that. So how and when did you become ordained as a Buddhist monk? Like, what is that process?
The first time I ever ordained as a Buddhist monk, I think I was 18, and it was just for this short ordination type of retreat. So it was here in Southern California. And
so anybody can do it? You can just sign up for a retreat and then come out ordained as a monk?
Yeah, it's temporary though. Yeah, if you actually, yeah, you have to like disrobe at the end of it, at the end of the training period. But yeah, so I did that for the first time here in California, and that kind of gave me a glimpse of what that was like. But I didn't really do a longer period until just 2019. I was in Thailand doing an 8-month retreat. So I rented out a condo behind the temple in Bangkok. So I taught English there in the morning, and then the rest of the day I was just meditating. And then after doing that for 5 months, my teaching monk who was there said, "Hey, you should do the summer ordination." And I was like, "Oh, I don't know." And he's just like, "Really, you should do it." And so I said, "Okay, I'll do it." So I did it, and there's just this thing, and I think this is helpful, particularly for guys, to just be in an environment with other men who are doing and undergoing the same kind of training. It's kind of like military training. Like everything you do, you wake up together at the same time, you eat together at the same time, you meditate and sleep together, and it's just like this really strong brotherly experience starts to come out of it. And the what that experience really taught me, and what that time there really taught me, was that my life was just a mess. Like outside of spirituality, my life was pretty much a mess. Like sure, I was a loan officer and things were okay, but I was not. Yeah, I really let a lot of things slide in terms of relationships, and even in terms of worldly duties and commitments to my family and stuff. So after I saw all of that while I was ordained, I saw that, wow, like I had just let spirituality become single-handedly the most important thing in my life. And that had its benefit. It really did. I would not be talking to you and having this conversation if that was not the case. But just because spirituality is the most important thing in my life, it didn't mean that I had to neglect all these other areas of my life. And that became very apparent when I was a monk. Like, you shave your head, you put on these robes, you even get a different name. And suddenly you start to look back on the years and back on the lessons, and you wonder, where the hell did my last decade go? Like what happened, right?
Yeah.
So it really allowed a lot of introspection, and that's the thing. The meditation is crucially important, and awakening and these experiences are also so valuable. But the introspection and the reflection and really looking at our own faults is very important. I didn't do that. I didn't assess myself enough and see, hey, is this pattern working? Like, is this specific way of behaving actually serving me? And if it isn't, how do I change that? I didn't do enough of that. And so when I was a monk, this really just like basic worldly stuff that I had neglected really came up, and it forced me to acknowledge it and address it.
Wow. So I love this. I love this conversation, because I think there's this perception that if you're a monk and you're wearing the robe and you're shaving your head and you're kind of walking the walk, talking the talk, then everything must be calm and orderly and handled. But you're telling me that no, you were in the robe, in the sandals, meditating in Nepal, Thailand, and life was still a mess.
My life as a monk was, for that period of time, it was 3 months, right? In that environment, it was fine. because you're in the initial training period. So you're not very busy yet, or you don't have much commitment. You're still just going through the initial training. But it made me reflect on my life prior to that, all the lessons and things that I did for the 10 years. And I remember actually, because some of us, we live in the present so much that we're not really too concerned about the past. But it made me, I actually sat down and I began to think, okay, so like after my dad died, what did I do in 2012? What did I do in 2013? And I'd never done this before, so it was interesting. I just went back through the years and saw what it was that was taking up, what it was that I did for the majority of that year, and who I spent my time with, and what lessons I learned, and what I gained from those experiences. And I just found that interesting because, sometimes we just wonder where the time has gone, but the truth is we were definitely doing something, right? So I got to go back and really look through that and pull the gems out of those experiences and integrate them as a monk. And one of those things was that, in my early 20s, I became a loan officer and worked for this millionaire. And after my dad died when I was 19, I was so certain about wanting to just stay at a monastery and meditate and master meditation for a few years. And he passed away, and I had to come home after that and really be with my family. And that certainty that I had, that vision that was so clear, like I'm just going to stay at a monastery and master this and, finish school and become a monk. And that's my life. Like that was going to be it. He died, and that whole thing just got flipped upside down. I was back at home, school, work, and that was never where I wanted to be. And for some reason that pain and that trauma of losing him, it was so intense. It just made me forget why I had initially set out to do this and what I had initially set out to do. The whole thing about staying in a monastery and mastering meditation, that just gone into thin air. It just wasn't even on the map anymore because of the situation. And once we lose that sense of purpose and that sense of direction for whatever reason, if we're not clear on our vision, what often happens is we end up being subjected to the vision of another person, what it is that they want for your life. And I definitely fell into that. I really had no place, working with this wealthy man, doing all these loans. I mean, I'm glad that I did it and I learned something from it, but I really bought into his vision of what I was supposed to become. And I totally thought that I was past that years before, but that the loss of my father, it really got to me, and it put me through many years of being lost. And when I finally got out of that, I emerged and I saw like, wow, you can really forget the why. You can really forget something that's so close to you. So that purpose, whatever it is, and that passion and that spirituality that everyone that's listening has, it's so special. And it's so rich and it's so deep. And, you don't know, I didn't know how valuable it was until I had lost it. And I never stopped meditating, right? I kept doing that and I kept pursuing spiritual knowledge. But that same drive and that same vision, that was really gone after I lost my dad.
So in our last couple of moments, what is Ryan Burton doing now? Like what iteration of self are you in at this moment? How are you serving? How are you integrating your past, your present? What is your future looking like?
Yeah, well, now I teach meditation for schools and companies, and I do one-on-one coaching as well for people who want to progress in their practice and learn to meditate and have awakening unfold. So that's what I do. I host a podcast called After Awakening, where I interview spiritual experts and masters of meditation, really. And we explore, what is this whole awakening thing? What is enlightenment? There's so many different definitions and tastes and flavors and versions and colors of it. So So my show After Awakening is really an exploration of that. And as far as the unfolding is concerned, later for me, I really had to distinguish between mystical experiences and a lived, ongoing, moment to moment wakefulness. And when I began to get in touch with that, I really, or when that unfolded, I really saw that this is what I want to share with people through meditation, through presence, and through awakening.
Well, Ryan, thank you so much for this very enlightening and informative interview. Can you please tell our listeners how they can find you?
Yeah, you can all find me at www.ryanjburton.com. The podcast transcripts are on there, and you can reach me through there. My Instagram is ryan.jburton. And
don't forget about your Clubhouse room with the Vibe Queen, the Spiritual Awakening Signs and Symptoms. I think that room is still going on for a week.
Absolutely. Yeah. You could find After Awakening in Apple Podcasts, and of course on Clubhouse where Susan and I met. The room has been going. I mean, at 6:00 today, it's going to hit the 72-hour mark of having ran continuously. So.
Yes. So definitely Signs and Symptoms of Awakening, just pop in, or every Monday at 6 p.m. Pacific. That's correct?
Absolutely. Absolutely. On Clubhouse.
Well, Ryan, thank you very much. I want to thank our listeners for joining me today on this inner journey. And I want to always encourage you to remember to be conscious. If you love this episode and if today's message resonated with you, please subscribe, rate, and review the Be Conscious podcast. I want to know what inspired you and what conscious topics you would like to hear more about. And if you want, please share your thoughts with me at info@SusanNicholasMD.org.
Thanks for listening to the Be Conscious podcast with author, TEDx international speaker, and conscious coach, Dr. Susan Nicholas. Be sure to connect with her to stay up to date with her latest news and works. Learn more about her conscious speaking platform at SusanNicholas.org/speaking. Stay tuned for the next thought-provoking episode. And whether you are coming or going, looking inside or out, remember to be conscious.